Hey everybody, before we get started, we wanted to just give a quick trigger warning. When we're discussing the books that we've read since our last podcast, there is brief discussion about religious trauma, sexual assault, and child sexual abuse. So if you'd like to skip that discussion, you can look at our show notes and we indicate there when our author discussion begins. So thanks for listening.
Hi, and welcome to the Newbery Chronicles. This is a podcast where two people read through every Newbery medal-winning book, and then we talk about it. I'm Michael.
And I'm Rebecca.
And this time we're talking about the 1929 Newbery medal-winning book, The Trumpeter of Krakow, by Eric P. Kelly. And just as a disclaimer up front, neither Rebecca nor I are Polish, nor do we know Polish people, nor have we been to Poland, and there are a lot of Polish names. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing Krakow correctly. There are diacritical marks on some of these words that I don't know what they mean. So please forgive us, our hundreds of thousands of Polish listeners, please. Anyway, I'm sure that everybody has been just enjoying the fact that we've been putting out podcast episodes consistently over the past 3 months, and we've not at all been not putting out podcast episodes. But here we are again at our regularly scheduled time. Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at me, but...
I'm just waiting to hear the dig.
There's no dig. I'd just like to dig through your reading
gosh.
pile and ask you what you read since we last podcasted.
Oh, right, Michael. Okay. I am the reason we are late, as always.
I didn't say that.
This book took me a really long time to finish. But some things I read in the meantime that may or may not have been more interesting than this book were Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lentz. I am a One Tree Hill fan. I started watching One Tree Hill in college. So for those of you who don't know who Bethany Joy Lentz is, she was Haley in One Tree Hill.
Oh, Haley. Okay.
She was also part of a cult while the show was going on. So this book is her memoir about her time in this religious community that turned out to be very controlling. I enjoyed reading this memoir. I enjoyed hearing about her life. Obviously not that I enjoyed her like trauma, but I enjoyed hearing her retell her story and share her narrative. I walked away from this memoir feeling like there's just a lot of healing that she has to do that I think if that healing happens, it would allow her to be a little bit more charitable in her faith, especially with people who maybe aren't as conservative as her. Anyway, so
is she
I'm not
religious conservative?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and like
While you're talking about this, I assume that she escaped this cult and became less conservative.
There's just I believe that that's true, but there's just some ways that she talks about groups of people. I couldn't give you specifics, or just way that she describes people that I'm like, I don't think you're getting the full picture there.
Does she talk about the Asian menace of the Tatar people?
She doesn't.
Oh, okay.
She doesn't.
She got one over Mr. Kelly.
I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics because I think this is helpful to talk about with people who've actually read it. But anyway, I thought it was enjoyable. I think she did a good job, like telling her story. There's also parts where the thing that also annoyed me is like when she's talking about. When she's setting up the stage to introduce you to people that you know are not going to be the most savory like parts of her character, she just kind of like criticizes their appearance, and I didn't love that. I think that we can criticize people's character without calling them ugly.
Oh, so she does share some connections with the Trumpeter of Krakow in that case.
Yes. So anyway, but I don't mean to be like really negative about this book. I enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed talking with other people who read it and know a little bit more about her life.
As a bystander, Of
Okay.
all the books that Rebecca's about to talk about, this is by far the one that she has met the most people who have wanted to talk about it with her.
Yes. Yes. It was very popular. Okay, I also read The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. Obviously, you can tell this is a story about Fred Rogers' life. And it was read by the lovely LeVar Burton.
Like in the audiobook?
Yes. So that was really fun
Good
to just
LeVar.
see these PBS heroes sharing in this journey. A lot of this book was not news to me because I watched a documentary that came out several years ago and really loved that. Like, I watched it several times because it was so moving to me. So a lot of this book felt like things that I already knew. But
Did it
they
talk
did.
about him talking to his kids with the puppets? That's one of my favorite Mr. Rogers.
I think so. They did talk more about his childhood, which I really enjoyed learning about. Overall, this was a hard book to listen to because it was just like a lot of facts and a lot of like names of people that it's just hard to like retain. But it was well done. I read this book. I do not remember how this got on my radar, but I read this book called Moonrise Over New Jessup by Jamila Minix. If you recommended this book to me and you're listening to this, tell me because I don't remember how this book got on my radar. I might have seen it in an advertisement from The Bottom, which is a bookstore here in Knoxville. Anyway, this book, sorry, it's been a while since I read this book, but this book is about a community that is, this is based, sorry guys. This book takes place in the 60s when the civil rights movement is really picking up. But this book is set in a town that is just a community of black citizens. It is black owned, black run. They are their own segregated community of black business owners, and basically they've created their own safe community here, completely segregated from white society, but having a lot of control over their finances and their ways of living. And so really it just asks a lot of questions about what civil rights meant for communities like this, and has just through this fictional story presents questions of what desegregation would mean for certain communities, who it benefits, and is there an alternative. So anyway, it was really good, really engaging. I enjoyed reading it. Yeah. And I read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, which is a YA memoir. Not read a YA memoir before, but it is a YA memoir.
Does that mean it's written for young adult audiences, or it's written by a young adult?
It's written for young adult audiences.
Okay.
It is written by a non-binary individual named George M. Johnson, and about their history with being queer, as growing up as a black male who is queer, and then their gender identity and journey throughout that. I thought it was just fine. I think it is really good for young adults. It was not very interesting to me literarily. What is the literarily? I just felt like
a YA book to me.
It's just like a conversation, and I think that for young adults it's really important. I think the story is really important. This book has been banned a lot, and it's got a lot of attention because it has been banned, but this is them telling their story that involves sexual assault, and it involves really hard things, and really beautiful things. I really enjoyed learning about how their family was very supportive of them, and they attribute their success and their ability to thrive to that supportive environment that they had within their family, while they didn't have that in the larger culture. So I thought it was well done, but it is a YA memoir, so like for its literary quality, it wasn't that interesting. Not to say that there are not YA books out there that have strong.
It's a trend, though. It's a trend that YA books tend to not be super interesting on a literary level.
And I also think this book is really interesting and important, and I don't want to take away from that and what they have done, which I think is really great. I also read Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo, who was on my radar because she is a YA author, and I read her book Poet X, which was very good, about this Dominican girl who is also a slam poet and explores like her relation with her mom. This book is I want to say her only adult novel, and I thought its literary quality was very, very strong. It is about this family of magical women, and the framework is that one of the matriarchs knows that she is going to die, and so she plans this living wake, which honestly sounds wonderful. Like, I feel like
The living wake sounds wonderful.
Yes, like I feel like we should be able to celebrate with the people that we love before we die, and tell them how much they meant to us, and hear them say how much they meant to us before we die. I'm just saying
I don't
that.
trust people until they know I'm dead, though. That's
Okay.
why you gotta Tom Sawyer this.
This book
Fake your own death.
This book was really good. I don't have a lot to say about it because I know I'm taking a long time. But what's funny is this book got on my radar because I was listening to somebody talk about it who didn't like it, and I was like, that sounds really interesting. And I really enjoyed it. It was very good. And then Michael and I'm going to let you talk about it.
This last book is a good transition piece because both of us read it.
Okay. Michael's going to talk about the last book that we just finished.
No, you should talk about it first, but I'm saying we can talk about it together because this, of all the books, is the one that we have both read.
We finished The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison that we're reading with our friend.
And we're in fact going to talk about it with our friend tomorrow, which is when our kind of informal book club meets.
Yes, it was a very beautiful book, very hard to read.
Incredibly hard to read. How many, have you just read Beloved besides?
Yes, Beloved is my only.
Okay, I've read several Toni Morrison books, and they all deal with difficult topics on one level or another, but this was by far the hardest content to read. I mean, Beloved involves infanticide, so
right.
like, for me to say that, but like, I don't know,
I also feel like Beloved is more, it was harder for me to know what was actually going on in
Beloved was a lot more dreamlike.
This book is very straightforward in its portrayal of childhood memories and childhood abuse.
It's basically about like cycles of abuse in this very poor like black community in Ohio in like the early or mid 20th century, I guess. It's like the 1940s, is it right? Is that right?
I think so. And there's also, I will say, it's not just about abusive households. It's also about like contrasting the household of this one girl, Piccola, I guess is how you say her name, who has a very neglectful mother, a sexually abusive
by
father.
Her father multiple times.
And it's about her desire to be loved and also to have proximity, specifically to have blue eyes. And how that's portrayed in the book is this proximity to whiteness. Toni Morrison's foreword in that book was incredible. Just explaining. Did you reread the foreword after you finished it?
No, I read it before we read the book. But yeah, I think it's interesting. She doesn't consider this a very good book. Like, she looks at it as like a juvenile effort.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. This is an incredible.
And this was her first novel.
Incredible. Like, if someone writes this as their first novel, like, they might as well retire. I mean, good thing Toni Morrison didn't. But like,
So she explains in the foreword that she was inspired to write this book from a conversation she had as a child with her friend who is also black, who said that she wanted to have blue eyes. And so Toni Morrison is just talking about what a freak of nature that would look like for this beautiful black girl to have blue eyes, and just talking about how she would prefer to be a freak. These are her words. No, she would prefer to be a freak rather than embrace the beauty that she has that she doesn't recognize because of what cultural norms have told her is beautiful.
Yeah, and she's writing this book in like 1970 or something. So like this is like right at the peak of like Black Power, like James Brown, Say It Loud and Black and Proud, like that is only like at this moment is becoming a thing Black people will talk about, like, is the value of Blackness, you know.
So she creates this story about this young girl who is neglected and abused and desires these blue eyes, and to just explore like what happens to people and to our society when we don't value specifically children. I don't know that she would say that's what this book is about, but that's what I took away from it. When we don't value specifically children and help them see the beauty and the power and the strength that is within them, and when we don't foster that,
I think it's
what
not
happens?
just children, but the way that children end up carrying the burden of
Yes.
like the prejudices of the adult world.
Yes.
Like, because almost entirely, not exclusively, but almost entirely, this book is told through the perspective of children.
Yeah.
There's a few sections that aren't, but oftentimes those sections begin with us kind of flashing back to the adult's childhood anyway. But like a lot of it is like children who are not conscious of like the structures of the adult world, but kind of inferring those or replicating the like prejudices and hierarchies of the adult world amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Like there's this really awful sequence that involves like basically like this woman who does not feel like she is satisfied in her marriage, and that comes from this like, you know, very repressed childhood. But then she like displaces that onto her son, who then takes that kind of what his mother has taught them and like violently enacts that on like another child, and also a cat. And like there's just like all sorts of stuff like that. Really difficult book to read, to be honest. Like we read this partially in response to our local school system banning it from libraries, and I think this should be in libraries, but I'm more sympathetic to banning this book than like, let's say, a Shel Silverstein book, which also was removed, just because it is extraordinarily difficult content.
We're going to keep moving because we're kind of getting away from
podcast about Toni Morrison. It should be, though. Why did Toni Morrison never win a Newbery Medal? Give The Bluest Eye a Newbery Medal.
I don't think she wrote any children's books.
She did not. But,
so, did you have anything else you read that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so besides The Bluest Eye, I read a few others, and I'm kind of shortening because it's been long enough that I've read lots. But one thing I read, speaking of the 1970s, I read a fairly comprehensive history of the Black Panther Party. It's called Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party by Joshua Bloom and Waldo E. Martin Jr. It took me a long time to read because I was kind of on again, off again reading it. But its premise is basically, and to my knowledge, it's the only book-length treatment of like the history of the Black Panther Party. I might be wrong, but basically, its premise is that like the Black Panther Party is oftentimes like discussed by reactionaries. You know, people who viewed them as a threat or viewed them as like something that's fundamentally foolish. Whereas like these authors wanted to actually take the Black Panther Party on their own terms and tell the history of the Black Panther Party in terms of like what the party's actual objectives were, and still being clear-eyed about like the ways that it was flawed, but not flawed because like it's scary that Black people have guns, or not flawed because there's something inherently racist about what the Black Panther Party did, you know, which they do a good job of pointing out how there was a whole spectrum of beliefs among the Black Panther Party, and overwhelmingly they were opposed to like white hegemony and like the kind of oppressive normalization of whiteness as opposed to like individual white people. Because that's sometimes, a lot of times, like, also they point out that there's people misconstrue what the Black Panther Party was doing, but also they point out how the Black Panther Party was very decentralized in a lot of ways, and how one of the things that ultimately led to its demise was that they had the central party leadership, largely based in Oakland, you know, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton and all those folks. But you had chapters everywhere, you know, in the United States, well, in many places in the United States, and there was a tension between those two. But anyway, it's just like, largely it's a history of the Black Panther Party. It's a little bit of an analysis of what the Black Panther Party accomplished, which is fairly impressive in the time frame that they were active, which is really just about, you know, a 3 to 4 year period. I mean, they were active longer than that, but like their peak years were that. So they accomplished some very effective things, but also being fairly clear-eyed about their flaws as well and what caused their downfall. Which was of course a mix of the FBI and local law enforcement actively conspiring against them in the case of especially like Fred Hampton in Chicago, but also elsewhere. But in addition to that, the kind of internal contradictions of the Black Panther Party that made it hard to sustain, especially once the Vietnam War started winding down, because Black Panthers got a lot of support from white allies who were kind of shared in their opposition to the Vietnam War, and once that started winding down under the Nixon administration, they kind of lost a lot of their support. But anyway, it was good. It was a lot. It's fairly dense history, but I think it's important history, especially because there's not really been a movement before the Black Panther Party or since the Black Panther Party that's really like the Black Panther Party in its scope and influence. So I thought that was really interesting. I also read a book called Siddhartha, which is a German novel by this guy named Hermann Hesse, I think is how you would say it, like Polish. I'm not native to German, so maybe I'm mispronouncing that. But so this is from 1922, and it's basically a book that is about this guy named Siddhartha who is basically living at the time of the Buddha, and he's going on his own quest for enlightenment. And it's written very much like a parable or like almost like a saint's hagiography or something like that, where you're kind of following this guy's life and everything in his life is like teaching a lesson or something. And it's a very reflective novel. A coworker of mine gave it to me and was interested in me reading it, and I thought it was pretty interesting and pretty good. I was expecting it to be more explicitly Buddhist, but it's kind of like pan-Eastern religion a little bit, which I guess makes sense since it's a German author and not like an author from Asia. It was good. I'm interested to talk about it with my coworker and see what he has to say about it. But I enjoyed it. I'm not like super fluent in like Buddhism and Hinduism, which it draws heavily from, but it is still interesting to me. And then lastly, I read this book called God and Empire, Jesus Against Rome, Then and Now by John Dominic Crossan, which is, I guess I hesitate to call it theology because this guy presents himself as like a historian. John Dominic Crossan is associated with the movement called the Historical Jesus Movement, which is like a bunch of scholars whose attempt to engage with Jesus is more based on historical inquiry than just using the Gospels like an Orthodox Christian would. And so it's not just an examination of what's in the Bible, it's also intersecting a lot of stuff from history, and it also kind of used the Bible not as a primary source, but a secondary source, in the sense of, these are not necessarily the direct words of Paul and Jesus, who are kind of like the main things analyzed here, but more of the reflections of the authors of those books, which again, like, would obviously diverge from like Orthodox Christianity. And it's specifically about the relationship between the early Christian writers and early Jewish writers in parts of the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and the dominant empires at the time, primarily Rome with the New Testament. And I thought it was interesting. John Dominic Crossan is a person I've heard in podcasts a lot. This was the first book of his that I read, and kind of like how he's in podcasts, he goes on strings of kind of connective tissue between all sorts of ancient historical documents. He might be talking in a single paragraph about something that Josephus said, and then tie that into something from the New Testament, and then tie that into something that a Roman author said. And sometimes it's very interesting. Sometimes I maybe struggled to see what his connections were. He makes insights that I'm sure on some level are valid. He just doesn't often explain them. And part of this is because this is building on an earlier work that I haven't read. So I picked this book up for a couple of dollars at a local used bookstore just because I was interested. And it was interesting. I feel like it's incomplete because I haven't read his other work. But it was interesting. anyway, we have now been talking for
Too long.
about the books we've read. So now we'll get into the book that we've read, which is the book of the hour, hopefully just an hour, The Trumpeter of Krakow. So it's been so long since we've done this. We do the authors first, right?
Yes.
Okay. So actually, I'm sorry that we went so long on the books that we've read, but I have quite a lot to say about this author.
Please
because
educate
he's
us.
got a whole lot to say. And also, I want to say, oftentimes when I'm doing the author bios, I go straight to Wikipedia, which I did this time. But I also started Googling him and found a website created by a person named Emily Comer in 2015, who apparently did this as part of her as part of a project for her Histories of Children's Literature class that she took at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So thank you, Emily, because your webpage was much more well-cited than this Wikipedia article, which had a lot of those brackets, citations needed pieces.
She has receipts.
So yeah, I mean, I hope she got a good grade on this. But anyway, so this is kind of cobbled together from Wikipedia and her page, and there's actually some places where Wikipedia and her page diverge, and I'll mention that.
I trust Emily.
Anyway, the author of The Trumpeter of Krakow's name was Eric Philbrook Kelly. That's what the P stands for.
Okay.
And he was born in 1884 in Massachusetts, someplace called Amesbury. I don't know where that is. But when he was 5, he moved to Colorado and grew up around the Denver area, and eventually moved back to the East Coast to complete high school, and then went to Dartmouth College, or university. I guess it's Dartmouth University. But he graduated from Dartmouth in 1906, and after that he worked as a journalist. And this is one of those places where Wikipedia really needed to cite their sources because they have this incredible quote. It's in quotation marks, but they don't even say where it comes from, and after the paragraph they say citation needed. So I don't even know if this is a real quote, but this is an incredible quote if he actually said this. Allegedly, Eric Philbrook Kelly said that he spent 10 colorless, uneventful, and discouraging years working on newspapers.
Oh.
So he did not enjoy being a journalist. And then this is kind of where Wikipedia and Emily Comer's project diverge, but at some point he went to France because he was tired of journalism and started working for basically an organization that, it sounds almost like the Peace Corps or the Red Cross or something like that, like a kind of like peaceful, like supporting people in wartime. So at this point, obviously, as we know, World War I broke out. And at some point, he goes and starts helping French soldiers. Wikipedia says it was in 1918. Emily Comer says that it was a little bit later that he went and helped with the reconstruction of Europe. Regardless, at some point he goes over to France. And while in France, he meets a bunch of Polish people who were basically displaced from Poland during the war. And Poland had been under various imperial conquests through like Napoleon and later on Russia. And after World War I, the powers that be, I guess it was the League of Nations or something, decided to reconstruct Poland into an independent state yet again for the first time in like a couple hundred years. And so meeting these people in meeting these Polish people in France, they brought him back to Poland, the new Poland, because of his work in France. Now, Wikipedia says that as part of his job he went. Emily Comer says that he went because he was invited by these Polish people. Whatever the case, he eventually finds himself in Poland, and eventually in 1921, after having spent some time in Poland, he returned to the United States. For a short time, he became a prep school teacher, and then he started working at his alma mater, Dartmouth, again as a professor. where he taught English journalism and Slavonic literature for the next 33 years until he retired. And so his time in Poland was super impactful. Obviously, like Slavonic literature, I'm guessing Polish literature was included in that. And he never really severed ties with Poland. Throughout his academic career, he did stuff with Poland, and most significantly for our podcast right now, in 1925 and 1926, he became an exchange scholar to a university in Krakow called Jagiellonia University, I think is how you say it, but probably better than I just pronounced it. Which was part of a diplomacy program from the New Poland to the United States, basically to kind of shore up allies and build out the international network of people allied with Poland. During those years, he spent quite a lot of time at the Church of Our Lady Mary, which ends up being kind of a central location in the novel, The Trumpeter of Krakow. And that's when he started writing The Trumpeter of Krakow, while he was in Poland as a visiting scholar there. And this is what, according to Emily Comer, this is what he says in his Newbery Awards acceptance speech. He says about the first time he heard a particular musical piece played at the Church of Our Lady Mary, he says, "As I came into Krakow after that great day when Poland rose from the grave, I suddenly heard the great bell boom over my head with its deep accent, and then the tocsin, Tocsin, I don't know what that is, the smaller bell, which drove the pigeons scrambling and shook them into the light like white snowflakes. As all were settling, and there was but the fluttering of wings high in the air, there came from above the call of the trumpet, the hymnal, which had been played since civilization first began in Poland nearly 1,000 years before. I can't describe my emotions. I was so happy I wanted to scream aloud. I wanted to sing and dance and stand on my head." So what he's describing there is a piece called St. Mary's Trumpet Call, or in Polish, hymnal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But this is a piece that is still played in this church, and in fact broadcast over the radio. And it's like a piece that apparently sounds unfinished. I listened to it. It's hard to tell to me that it sounds unfinished, but at any rate, it's a piece that has like a long tradition of, it's like an unfinished piece. It kind of cuts off in the middle, and they play it every few hours at this church. And that was so moving to him for him to hear that he started writing this novel. And I'll wrap back around to this in a minute, but I want to finish his biography real quick. Obviously he returns to the United States, wins the Newbery Medal for Trumpeter of Krakow, writes several other children's novels set in Poland as well, and seems to have like a very illustrious history since then. So as many people know, in World War II, the inciting incident of World War II is Hitler's invasion of Poland, right? So obviously, like, this country that had only really been independent for a few decades is yet again under threat, which causes quite a few people to leave Poland, yet again. There's all these Polish refugees internationally, and some of them went to Mexico, apparently. And so the State Department of the United States took Eric Kelly, who obviously had connections to Poland, and had him establish a refugee settlement for displaced Poles in Mexico, in this village called Leon. And so that's one cool thing that he did. Another cool thing that he did was that he was the chairman of the Pulitzer Prize Selection Committee for the novel. In 1951, 1952, and 1953. And in 1954, he retired from Dartmouth, and he died in 1960 on January 3rd. So, big career. I'm going to circle back around to the St. Mary's, what do they call it? the St. Mary's trumpet call, the Hainaul, because that's kind of like a central thing in the book. And one thing that is interesting is that there is a tradition of this being an unfinished piece, but Eric Kelly is responsible for what now exists as the kind of like folk tradition of why it is unfinished.
Really?
So in his book, The Trumpeter of Krakow, he describes how this is unfinished because there was this trumpeter who used to play the full piece and who in like the 13th century was killed in a raid because he was so dedicated to his craft of playing this piece, he didn't even stop when the enemy was coming into Krakow, and so he was shot in the throat mid-piece and is cut off then. That is the first instance. The Trumpeter of Krakow is the earliest written instance of that story being told.
Oh, wow.
There are earlier ideas that talk about how the trumpeter was killed or how the piece was unfinished because there was a raid on Krakow. But Eric Kelly in The Trumpeter of Krakow is the first person to write that the piece was unfinished because of the raid killing the trumpeter mid-song. So maybe that's like splitting hairs. But it eventually was, by the 1930s, being put into like tourist bureau or brochures and things like that. So it was
really?
Yeah, the people of Krakow really took to the Trumpeter of Krakow and specifically this kind of origin story for the St. Mary's trumpet call.
That's funny.
And again, it's not for sure that Eric Kelly completely invented this, but this novel that we read is the first instance of the full, what is now accepted as the story of the origin of this song when it was told. There's a few other historical notes that I can mention as we go through this novel, but I think it's quite enough history.
Yeah.
So what's the plot of this Trumpeter of Krakow novel?
I'm glad you told me all that, and I also wish I liked this book better because, anyway,
I told Rebecca
it's pretty important.
I told Rebecca before we started recording that, I mean, spoilers, but I don't think either of us really like this book, but I do think it'll be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, so let me tell you about it. This book is about a family, the Charnetskys. Joseph is the son, Andrew is the dad, the mother is unnamed. She is just mother.
She's just the mother. That was wild to me that they never gave her a name.
I didn't realize that until I was reading this synopsis, like, oh, you're right, she doesn't have a name. Anyway.
It's alright, women aren't important.
So their family home has been like ransacked or burned down in Ukraine. And so they are traveling to Poland. Andrew has a cousin there who's also named Andrew. He's got a different last name, but
it doesn't really matter because he's dead, right?
Well, yes, but they don't know that till they get there. So anyway, they get there and they're looking for refuge or looking for safety. They have this mysterious pumpkin that they refuse to sell to anybody, and find out that his cousin has been killed, and they're like, hey, you know, it's not probably safe for you to be saying you're related to this guy, change your last name. And meanwhile, Joseph has seen this dog that's been abused, and that in its abuse it starts to attack this man and his niece. He rescues them from the dog and also befriends the dog, which then becomes his dog. And then this man, who is the alchemist, yes, Kreutz, I guess is his name, he and his niece, Elzbietka, I think is how you say her name, take Joseph in and say, hey, let's go find your family, you can live with us. We got a room. So
the room is wild. Like, it seems like he owns this building.
Hang on.
Okay, all right.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it feels like this building has no walls. It's just a series of landings on stairs.
I don't know. I couldn't envision it.
Also, did you say this takes place in, like...
No, I didn't say.
Is it the 1400s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Long time ago. Way long ago.
Medieval Krakow.
Yeah. So anyway, meantime, there's been this guy before the incident with the dog, whose name is Wolf. there is this guy that's been causing trouble for the Charnetskys.
The button face or whatever his name is.
Yeah, we don't know that yet.
Sorry. As Rebecca is summarizing this, I'm piecing together what I remember of the book.
Okay.
I didn't do a lot of preparation for this.
Alright. So anyway, this guy is causing mischief, trying to buy this pumpkin. And the dad, Andrew, is like, heck no, you can't have my pumpkin. There's a little kerfuffle, and they get away from him. Well, while Joseph is saving the alchemist and his niece from this dog, there's another kerfuffle with this same guy who's trying to, like, I don't even remember, but trying to get the whole town against them. Anyway, Joseph comes back with his new friends, and then they meet this scholar and priest named Jan Canty.
Who is real. I found that
Oh,
out.
he's a real guy.
He's a real guy. He's a Polish, like, priest from this era.
Okay. Well, he helps them get refuge. Like, he diffuses the conflict, helps this family get to safety. And we also find out that the alchemist is tutoring this kid named Johann Tring.
Ooh.
Who is, like, into the occult and witchcraft and all this stuff, and is trying to, like, get the alchemist to turn everything into gold, which I was a little bit confused because I was like, isn't that what alchemy is?
Yeah, I think
Like,
the idea is that, like, at the time, alchemy is slowly transforming into, like, kind of rational science.
Okay.
And so, like,
Okay.
the kid is still, like, more, like, gung-ho into the weird, like, magical elements of alchemy,
Yes.
whereas the other dude is meant to be the kind of, oh, like, I'm the elder who's wise.
So he can also hypnotize him. So there's,
And hypnotism is, like, for real in this book. This is not,
like, he's sending him into some,
like, it's like Looney Tunes,
Some
like,
wild
you know,
stuff.
you are getting sleepy, like, kind of cartoon stuff.
and there's stuff happening up there. But you know what? Eric Kelly doesn't really know what's happening because he's just making stuff up. He's like,
It's very
and
obscure.
then there were colors, and then there was fire, and then there was so-and-so, and it was evil. But I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I'm not actually going to tell you what's happening because I don't know.
In his
Anyway.
defense, he had just arrived in
Okay.
Krakow a year prior, so he didn't really know things.
Okay. I'm talking about the magic. I'm talking about the... Anyway.
I've never been to Poland. They may have magic there. I
Oh
don't
my
know.
gosh. Okay, so all this stuff is going on in the loft. Elzbietka is scared of this guy. And
King, right?
yes, Tring.
Tring?
Yeah.
Okay.
Johann Tring. I
Tring.
think is his name. Johann. Our buddy Johann.
Johann.
Okay, in the meantime, Andrew, the dad, gets the job as the trumpeter in the evening. So he's teaching Joseph the story of the broken note, teaching him how to play the Hainal. And Joseph says, as a little aside to Elzbietka, that if you ever hear me play the whole song, then you know you gotta help because there's danger afoot. So, this guy who's been causing these kerfuffles at the beginning of the book, is still around, okay? So he robs the house one night to try to get what we find out later on has been hidden in this pumpkin. And it's the great Tarnov crystal.
The Philosopher's Stone.
The Philosopher's Stone.
Of Harry Potter fame.
Which Johann has been trying to get the alchemists to create in their little experiments. Okay, so this stone has powers, apparently. There's a lot of legend around this stone. People think that it, like, can help you see into the future and understand all this stuff. But really, what it does is you just look at it for a while and it reflects your thoughts back to you, which honestly sounds horrible. So, and it is horrible.
It looks horrible, yeah.
It is horrible. So anyway, we find out that this guy that was causing a kerfuffle is really named Peter the Buttonface.
Peter the Buttonface.
Not Buttface, but we should call him that.
He's got like a scar on his face or something that looks like a button
left
or
the
something.
shape of a button. Anyway,
I hate it when buttons scar my
he
face.
he tries to get this crystal, and dude, the alchemist starts performing all these spells and making all these colors, and it scares him. So Peter leaves, and we think that the crystal has been stolen by him. But wait, it has not. The alchemist has it. The alchemist has it. And he starts to really be affected by it. Meanwhile, he's still being put in all these trances by Johann. For some reason, he tells Johann about the crystal. And
probably because he's hypnotized by Johann.
Johann somehow causes this, he and the alchemist caused this huge fire.
I remember this because they're trying to find the formula for how to turn bronze into gold, like the alchemist thing. But instead, the formula they find is for like an incendiary powder or something, and they set the building on fire.
In the meantime, Peter, the button face, has gone back to the... Wait, no, I'm getting mixed up. Because this book has so many climaxes.
There's a lot going on in this book.
Before that, I believe.
Anyway, I feel like we can cut to the chase.
Before that, Peter goes back to the tower to try to get the crystal, and Andrew's like, "What you mean? Don't you have it? It's not in my house. Didn't you steal it?" And then Joseph ends up playing the full Hainel. I don't know how you say that. So his buddy, Elzbieta, comes to the rescue, saves them. Peter is taken to jail. Then there's this big fire.
Which is real, historically.
Yes.
Although, here's a historical interjection that I have. I don't know, like, we can be a little kind on Mr. Kelly here. He had just arrived in Krakow just a year earlier when he started composing this book. But this book is set in 1462. However, the fire that he is depicting actually did not happen until 1494.
Okay.
After which, the fire was blamed on the Jewish population of Krakow, and there was a huge pogrom. And then eventually the king of Poland forcibly expelled, or I guess the king of Krakow, forcibly expelled the Jewish people from the city.
Oh,
so
that's awful.
They don't talk about this in the story because they're more interested in the menace of like Asian Muslims, which we'll get to, I'm sure, later on. But this was an anti-Semitic. There was anti-Semitic implications in this fire in history.
Well, that's not good.
But anyway, there's a fire.
Anyway, eventually the alchemist, through the fire, is like, "No, I have the crystal. Peter doesn't have it." The king is back. The king has gotten back.
He's kind of come back so he can expel the Jews.
He's been traveling, but he's back. And so Andrew's like, "Okay, well, I don't want this crystal anymore. I've been hiding it for my family for however long. It's
because
awful.
It's come from Ukraine,
problems.
Right? That's why they left Ukraine, as people were raiding their house for this crystal, right?"
He's like, "I don't want it in the first place. I'm just going to give it to the king. He can decide what to do." Then you find out that Peter has been working for Ivan the Great this whole time.
The Russian Ivan
the Russian Tsar. And I don't remember why he wants a crystal.
It's, I might remember this. I think it's because Peter and his people want the crystal, but he'll only help Ivan the Great take over Ukraine if Ivan then procures the crystal for him.
Yes.
It's something like that, right?
Yes, something like some kind of exchange. And the alchemist is like, "Forget it." He grabs the crystal, like runs out of the castle. Nobody can stop him, and he just throws it in the ocean. And that's the end until the epilogue where you find out Joseph and Elzbieta get married, which obviously. Duh.
The only named female character in the book gets married to a man. I'm
Who
shocked.
has no other purpose but to pursue the ventures of these men. Anyway.
I think the only reason she was given a name was so that the passage where she hears the full musical piece played would make more sense. It would be hard to do that passage without a name.
Yes, so that's the book. I apologize for the summary.
It's a very convoluted book. I will also say, again, like, I guess, don't want to be too discrediting our expert,
Mhm.
analysis here, but like I often look at Wikipedia to remind myself of the plot. And whoever wrote the Wikipedia article for the Trumpeter of Krakow, like, went above and beyond. Like, it is no joke, maybe like 3,000 words written in summary of this plot. Like, you might as well read the whole book again.
Mhm. What did you like about this book?
So I found it unpredictable, and in some ways that's a good thing because, for example, you start reading this book and you're like, okay, this is this historical book, and then all of a sudden you have magic crystals and hypnotism, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess we're in a fantasy novel. But then it ends up being basically still a historical novel with like fantasy elements because I think, okay, so what I actually think is interesting in the book is that this book is meant to depict the moment, basically the moment, like right where the boundaries between like the Enlightenment and scientific revolution and like the earlier Dark Ages, right? It's meant to like do that kind of porous moment because you have the.
I didn't know that.
Well, I'm just like, this is what I'm like saying I like about it is like it's the moment in history that it's showing seems to be like where it's like you can see the glimmers of like, whatever, like, the scientific revolution, but there's also still like the superstitions, and like it's like both are true at the same time in the book. And I think that's interesting, but what's even more interesting is that it's written by a guy in the 1920s.
Yeah.
So it's like a guy in the 1920s thinking back to what he imagines as like what Poland would have been like in the 1400s. And not just that, he is a new to Poland person. So he's also thinking about Poland in these kind of like highly romanticized, like highly, I have to imagine, ahistorical terms. One thing I forgot to mention when I talked about Kelly, the Hainault, is that there's an extended discussion on Wikipedia about where the story comes from. And apparently Kelly himself admitted that like when he came to Poland, he didn't really speak Polish very well. And so he spoke French really well because of his time in France. And so he had to rely on Polish people who knew how to speak French, who could then translate for him things about Polish history to him. And so, like, there's all these layers of, like, there's an American speaking French to Polish people who are trying to relate their history to him. And some people think that he didn't even intend to create a folktale of the creation of this, of the St. Mary's trumpet call. He just simply misunderstood people as, in a lost in translation kind of moment.
Oh.
And that's how, like, he wrote down this story. But whatever the case, I just think it's really interesting layers, because, like, the 1920s, especially in America, are kind of, like, the height of, like, your kind of, like, scientific rationalism. You got, like, World War I has just ended, and people are like, all right, that was the war to end all wars. Like, we now know better. We have the League of Nations. Like, we're rational, scientific people now. So it's before World War II kind of dispelled those sorts of things and gave birth to, like, kind of the postmodern era. So you have, like, that being imposed on, like, a medieval setting. I don't know.
That's
the interlocking
context.
Historical stuff I thought was really interesting. Anyway, we can get things I don't like later, but I think that's mostly what I'm interested in is like it's depicting a historical moment for a particular other historical moment.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that, so I appreciate that context.
What did you like about it?
I do enjoy hearing about the history. I think it's cool that he could write a book that was so special to the people of Poland. A lot of times when people that aren't from that country write a book about their history, like they oftentimes like are not like favorable to the people, or they kind of say things that like feel really misconstrued. I guess if you're writing in the 1900s about something that happened in the 1400s, you're less likely to like mess things up because nobody really knows what happens.
They were in the midst of nation building as well. Like, I don't know how like strong like the Polish people had a collective identity.
Yeah.
But you have to imagine if you've been under the rule of various like imperial powers and now you have your freedom, you maybe are looking for national myths to latch onto.
I think that's really cool that he was able to form such a close bond with with Poland and write this story that meant a lot to them. I think that's really cool. As far as the story itself, I did like some of the characters. I do think it's a neat idea of two friends having a secret pact to like save, the whole town. I think that that's really a sweet part. Yeah, what did you dislike?
I mean, it's not a good story. I have to say, like, the structure is really strange. Like, it's a deeply strange structure that makes it really difficult to have momentum in the story. Because, like, there's a lot that happens, like a ton that happens, and there's a lot of intrigue and mystery and all that sort of stuff, but I don't know, maybe this is a displacement from, like, the 1920s and, like, what children's literature was like at the time, but, like, as much as what on paper sounds really interesting and bizarre, like, when we, like, talk about it, like, I found it really difficult to, like, read it and get any sort of momentum going. They don't present the intrigue in a way that I found intriguing.
Yeah.
And also, again, as much as I did like how it's like both alchemy and like science are like coexisting in ways that seem like they're on equal footing, it was very much a bizarre and threw me for a loop when all of a sudden people are being hypnotized and there's a magic crystal. And that's like late in the story. It's like 2/3 of the way through the story where this stuff.
Yeah,
like,
I was so confused. I was telling Michael, because he obviously finished this way before me.
I don't think that's obvious.
But I was like reading, I was like, why did they stop talking about this pumpkin? What happened to the pumpkin? Where is this?
The crystal is inside the pumpkin. I don't know if we
Right.
ever said that, but he's like hidden it inside the pumpkin.
I forgot to say that. But they don't tell you that until like way after. And I was like, it's taken me so long to read this book. I invented this pumpkin that didn't exist, but it did exist. It was just the vessel in which they were carrying the crystal.
Yeah, so I think like the story itself is interesting, but it's not told in the way that's interesting. It's told in a way that's convoluted to me. And I don't know, maybe that's that I'm not that smart, but I also think that like maybe I don't have the mind of a child and children might be even more confused. But I don't know. What do I know? The other thing I didn't like, and I don't want to be too dogmatic about this because A, I'm not European, B, I'm not European in the 1920s, C, I'm not Polish. So, like, there's all sorts of historical things that are, like, true about this that it depicts, but it seems quite xenophobic to me, like, the book. Like, the way that they depict things, and in particular, the way that it depicts Russians, and then also specifically, like, Asian, like, basically, like, Turks, like the Tatars, I guess, is how you say it. Like, it's like a people group that at one point included, like, the Mongols and, like, those sorts of people, too, but also is, like, Turkish. Like, it's, like, a huge, like, Asian steppe, like, people group. And they're all the villains in the story, right? And, like, you know, historically it makes sense that, like, the people in Poland would have, like, a kind of fear of people like that. But the way that the narration describes these people, it's a lot of times tied to their looks, right? Like, they look sinister, or they, like, you know, have, like, dark eyes, or, like, you know, there's a lot of those sorts of things where you're kind of, like, meant to infer a sinister nature to a character based on how they look. And a lot of times the look is based on kind of, like, ethnic qualities, or, like, they're not from here, or that sort of thing. And I don't know. Again, were I Polish and had I just been, you know, the subject of, you know, a couple centuries of imperial conquest, it might have been different. But reading it in the 21st century, like, it honestly just sounds like, you know, what European far-right political parties sound like now when they talk about, like, you know, people coming from Afghanistan or Syria or something like that, which I realize is not the same people group as what they're talking about here, but there is, like, don't they at one point talk about, like, one of them praying to Allah or something like that?
I don't remember.
I might be wrong, but there's definitely, like, an ethnic, like, these are not our people, and they're kind of, like, swarthy, like, dark people.
Well, also, they're just all bad.
And they're all bad, right? Like, and again, like...
Oh, yeah, Johann is also from that same descent.
Yeah, like, there's this idea that there's kind of, like, this hereditary, like, you know, amorality in, like, certain people. And it's not exactly stated outright, but it's always like in the descriptions of the characters. So it's not even like it's trying to display like what people would have thought at the time. It's like this is the opinions of the narrator of the story, and I don't know. I also I ran across this art this review of this book written by someone named Sarah Beth West, who also pointed to the interesting historical context at the time, wherein in the 1920s, a huge thing that had happened in Europe / Asia was the Bolshevik Revolution, obviously in Russia. And so, like, having, like, the East, quote unquote, and specifically Ivan the Great, like a Russian czar, being the threat, this person kind of postulates that maybe that's a reflection of, like, kind of anti-Russian sentiment at the time based on, like, the threat of the Bolsheviks, or the perceived threat of the Bolsheviks in Russia. And Kelly is on record of not liking the Bolsheviks. Like, when he came back from Poland, his first time in Poland, back to Dartmouth, I guess he had encountered Bolshevism or something in Poland, and like gave like several talks, kind of decrying like what he viewed as like the lies and propaganda of like the the communist ideology, and that makes sense to me. In the same way that, like, if you watch, like, American films from the past, like, 15 years, if they want, like, kind of an ethnic other, if you were in the 2000s, you always picked a Muslim, terrorist or something like that, But if you're in the 2010s and 2020s and you want, like, an ethnic other, you pick a vaguely Eastern European, maybe Russian person, because of, obviously, now we have, like, kind of increased anxiety about like Putin and obviously the past few years the invasion of Ukraine and that sort of thing. So this person, and it seems reasonable to me, kind of said that maybe this was a reflection of anti-communist anxieties. But anyway, I didn't like it.
I also felt it was boring. This is just like a critique of a lot of books written in this time period. There's just too little dialogue for me. I think the same thing about, like, Virginia Woolf and Jane Austen. Like, it's not, I'm not saying that's just a stylistic thing that has changed over time, which I appreciate. But the characters aren't telling a lot of the story. The characters have no real dimensions at all, especially the women. And there's a lot of, like, really high points in this story, and then the story keeps going on, and then there's another like big moment, and then the story keeps going on. It just felt like really anticlimactic to me because there's so many climaxes, but like not a lot of resolution within those, and like I just feel like they kind of all go together, but they don't. That goes back to like just the way the story is told. But yeah, I don't really have anything to add other than that.
So what, thumbs down I'm hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Thumbs down on this.
And I don't think it's just because, in the beginning I was like, well, it's just because you're not giving this book the time, but because I would stop and then like read it later and then stop and read it later, but like, I don't think the problem is me.
One thing I will say, we've occasionally on this podcast talked about the illustrations, and I really like the illustrations in this because they're all like cool. In the style of like woodcuts or whatever. Yeah. So like they have a very distinctive look to them, which I really enjoyed. So even though I'm thumbs down, I forgot to mention that as something I like. Yeah. The illustrations are good. I think based on the first of all, the book says decorations by instead of illustrations by, which I like. But I think it's a Polish person who did the woodcuts or the woodcut style illustrations. So, yeah. But yeah, I didn't overall like this either. So thumbs down. Sorry, Trumpeter of Krakow.
Well, that has definitely put us over our hour.
Yeah.
We do want to announce next time we are going to be reading Caddy Woodlawn, which is the 1936 winner. This was a childhood favorite of mine, so I'm excited to revisit it.
I think I read this when I was very young, maybe 8 years old or something. Yeah. So I don't remember anything about it. Well, so we'll see.
Tune in to see if we still like it.
Suspense. Hopefully it will not be 3 months, but no promises. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Bye, guys.